All right, we're going to talk about can governance and risk compliance professionals use artificial intelligence to make their job easier. Now, I was going to do this as a LinkedIn live, but frankly, I don't really, I didn't start the live stuff and the stuff I need to syndicate. If you'd like me to do a live so that you can ask questions, please in the comments below, go ahead and do that. But I'm going to record this and then upload it because there's been some chat about using artificial intelligence in risk and compliance management. And in fact, for a number of years, 3 to 5 years, we've been talking about in some of the environments that I've been in about using machine learning and using artificial intelligence in risk management to do a few things. So I replied on to Dr. Bruce Weinstein on one of the forums on LinkedIn, and I'm sure not sharing the screen or anything, but I'm talking to you in the screen because I basically replied with a model. So he asked, how can risk professionals use ChatGPT specifically the right way in order to develop better controls and lower risk? Now, there was an article from Forbes magazine that talked about how smart leaders are using ChatGPT in an ethical way. See, it would be unethical to use ChatGPT in these environments and not understand that the model, even using the Python APIs, needs to take data from your environment and send it out to OpenAI. Now, unless you're 100% confident that their API has privacy controls, which it doesn't. And by the way, I'll give you a little background. So in the last probably 6 months or so, I've been looking at how the privacy around OpenAI. I was kind of shocked that they didn't have any compliance people on their job listings or working for their company. I'm sure they do, but my question was, is OpenAI, specifically ChatGPT, a secure tool to use with data sets? So I actually asked the ChatGPT platform, I read the manuals, I went through the paperwork, and as far as I understand, and this is consistent with what they disclose on their website, is that the AI learning models, even if you train an internal model, does pick up a little bit of data. So these 11 million people or 100 million people who are testing ChatGPT are actually training ChatGPT. So the platform discounts the training of the individuals who are interacting with the general chat platform, but it actually has internal people who have been flagged as experts, and it uses their data set. Now, most of these people are internal to ChatGPT, the OpenAI environment. Now, I also looked at Google Lambda and a couple other open kind of like AI platforms, because the concept that artificial intelligence can read trillions of documents and then recall the documents using natural language models is fascinating. Not only is it fascinating, it is extremely useful. It is like a natural language SQL or query system to ask a database for results. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but I've got 22,000 articles and special reports and materials that I've written for a number of years. In fact, it's the entire body of unpublished work for a publishing company that I've owned, as well as materials I have rights to, public domain materials, and other documents that I use internally. So I have like a 2 terabyte database of PDF files and research files, and we have tools to manage that. But I had asked the question, could I have OpenAI help me search these records in order to answer questions that come up as I'm providing services to my clients? I sat down and read and sat in 8 hours of Federal Trade Commission discussions on model risk. And so machine learning, artificial intelligence, model development, that's an area of my interest over the last 3 to 5 years. And ultimately what happens is that these systems can help you, but we don't necessarily know how they're helping you. Now, if you have an intimate understanding of tensors and, network models and how they train these models, yeah, maybe you do understand, but we still don't know why this word was picked over another word other than the weighting of the credentials or credibility of those who are authenticating information. So artificial intelligence is not doing this on their own. And that means that if you use the Python OpenAI API, which is the application program interface, there's a potential you could leak your internal data. So one of the things that I asked ChatGPT about is if I could use fake data, because I wanted to know whether I would contaminate their model by using fake data. And the artificial intelligence environment, who's intimately familiar with the coding, it can tell me how to code this stuff. I am a novice Python coder. I can code a little bit of C, Bash scripts and stuff like that, and some Perl. But it flat out told me that I need to tell the system I'm using fake data because there could be a data contamination or leak. So for example, you have to hash all PII, personally identifiable information. And that's best practice. So in the compliance world, in the data compliance world, you're gonna do that. But I also have to be careful about the associations because the artificial intelligence platform could make assumptions. Now, the platform, we tend to humanize the artificial intelligence world. The platform is not making assumptions. The platform is building associations and neural, in layman's terms, kind of like a neural network of ideas and concepts, clusters of ideas. And it is possible for it to make an association between data you introduce in the environment to test and the data that is actually useful data. So for example, to automate testing, I would use fake data. Like I would know the data is fake, and that way if the AI comes back with an answer that includes the fake data, then I know that I got the intended result from my prompt. So I know there's a lot of novice prompt engineers out there, but the right questions matter a lot when you're doing this. So if a compliance or risk professional is going to use artificial intelligence, they got to know how to ask the right questions. Now, in my experience, we can ask, second line can ask front line to create some processes and create some controls, and what we get back is completely garbage. Okay, that's how it would work with AI as well. But there's something about how we ask that gives us bad data. So the model that I replied with is a pretty consistent model, is actually to train the data, to train the AI on good controls. What are good controls and why are they good controls? So basically, your effectively rated controls, you would pair the control with the audit findings. Now, this data contains proprietary information. It could contain information about consent orders. It can contain data that you do not want outside your environment. So it is actually pretty dangerous to use the ChatGPT API or Google Lambda API or one of these other APIs. So what do you do instead? Well, you can use a binary model, and I'm going to try to give this in high level terms because I don't yet have the skill to convey it in very simple terms. But you could use a binary model where instead of having the additional data that's necessary to train a language model, you could have just the controls, and you can use their effectiveness rating as an on or off switch. So if it's highly rated effectiveness, or you could scale it with a score, but basically you can say to your machine learning that this control is effective. Now, the language model in the machine learning would look at the control, and it would determine who, what, when, where, why, and how. All the elements that are necessary when we have a good control. That would group those up and build a pattern on the effective controls. And then you train the model on ineffective controls. Now, this is control design. This isn't necessarily control the implementation. From there, we now have a picture of what is good and what is bad. Then we run the machine learning model back on the data again to see if it tells us that what we said was good is good and what they said is bad, that we said is bad. And then we'd run it on a test set of data. Now here, if we're doing it internally, we can run it on the data sets that are real live data. We can plug it into RCSA Archer. We can plug it into our Sharp system. In some environments, they call it Sharp. In other environments, they call it something else. But whatever your system of record is for your controls, if it has a date, if it has a rating, and if it has a control description, we can go ahead and process it. And we can say, these are good controls and these are bad controls. Run a test, and then we can train the machine by going through new data and having humans go through and determine good or bad. Now, the great thing about a financial services environment, an insurance company, a healthcare environment, is that you're going to have these periodic control reviews or control validations. So you can come back and say, okay, well, this control is now validated. But here's the problem. Humans can validate a control as effectively designed this year. It has all the same risks associated to it, all the same policies associated to it, all the same other elements, and ultimately it not be effective the next year. Now, again, we're talking only design, because just because it's designed to be effective doesn't mean the business is using it. Okay, because there's some of the best written controls in the world, the most effective control in the world that is not used is no better than the one that is not doesn't exist. Anyway, so that's one way you can train a model. So you can't the context necessary to send the data out to use the bigger ChatGPT model. It could possibly leak information from your organization. So instead we use a machine learning model and we just do like this A/B model, this binary model. Either it's good or it's bad. And then we, based on what the system learns, we look at new controls and then human review them to train the model. But something that is even more powerful is a network model that looks at the interconnecting relationships between the controls, their risks, and the related policy, which is usually in your system of record, and their date. Why is this important? Well, any control, so if you have a date for the risk, if you have a date for the policy, if you have a date for the control, and if in the last 30 days, any of those last modified dates, so these are dates when the policy has changed, if that happens, then we now know the interconnecting relationships of what is related to that, and then we can weigh out what controls should we look at. Now, this is very valuable because a lot of environments waste tremendous amount of times by looking at all the controls. It just blows my mind sometimes why we're going to do an RCSA, which is a risk, it's a risk self-assessment. Why are we going to look at every single control, some of which in the last 30 days, the last 40 days had already been reviewed? Why not look at what has the highest either concentration risk because of the ratings, so the high risks or the high rated controls, or why not look at where there could have been a risk register change, a policy change, a change in laws, rules, and regulations, or something else? Now, what's great about this particular model is that the machine learning tools can build a massive network diagram of all these relationships and weigh the relationships. So your high, medium, and low would be the weight. And then if anything changes in this massive web of your system of record, you get kind of a little change in degree. So for example, if something is aged, so you got a control, it hasn't been validated in 3 years. That control is going to be a little bit more dangerous than a control that was evaluated last week that is marked low and then found to be effective. Does that make sense? See, what we're doing here is we're using the automation and technology to make our jobs faster instead of dumping a spreadsheet with 1,500 controls in it and having somebody go through it. Now, whether or not my examples are from personal experience, I'll share with you there have been times where I've rewritten 70 to 80 controls in like a week, or reviewed 300 to 400 controls. There is no reason for that. Now I do build little models with an Excel spreadsheet, and I'll weight things out. I'll take the ledger, and then I'll build a calculation tab, and then I'll calculate aging, for example, ratings, I'll score everything, and then I'll rank the scoring, and that gives me an idea of what things need to be looked at first. And then I'll look at the most important things first, because if we run out of time, whether we're up against a consent order or a matter requiring attention or something to that effect, we'll at least have gotten the good ones done. And I don't know if I mentioned this before in other programs, a couple of my mentors talked about proactive, preventative. Well, the model, the network diagram with the objects in the diagram rated by several review criteria, and then interconnect it with relationships with, by the way, you can represent with a JSON file, or you can represent it with XML. Sometimes your RCSA Archer has ways of representing it, but basically you could API call and get back a list of the 10 controls in a particular business unit that have a concentration risk, particular controls that haven't been updated recently, particular controls that had a modification that hadn't been reviewed yet. And now we're focusing resources in a better way. Now, there'll be a link below to the note I made here, and then I've created additional content. But does this make sense to you? Instead of sending six-figure, $180,000 a year, $150,000 a year risk consultants in to review every stinking control, you're now focusing in a triage approach. So it's still the same audit group, the third line of defense, saying, here's what's important to us, but it's weighted into a system so that you just run a Python script, or you do a Tableau report, or you push a button, and it tells you what you need to focus on. Now, I needed to work on the major risk requirements, or the major control requirements for a group that I was working with, and we had 75 of these. Now, we had to review 260 of them because every year they go through and they review all of them and they apply them to the business. We did something similar with spreadsheets. I will tell you, it was horrific. I'd asked a couple times if we could get Python. I asked a couple times if we could use like MicroStrategies, for example, or IBM SPSS. I had enrolled individuals who had much more experience and knowledge than I had to convey the idea to management. But something in management, they were scared. They didn't know what to do, or they were just torturing me. I don't know. But we went through those using a triage method. We identified which things were related to different business units, and then it's kind of a cluster analysis. So we went through the risk register, and then we went through the business units that had controls that were focusing on the risk register, and we drilled down. It took like 8 months to do this. Okay, I now know, with less than 6 months of getting familiar with AI, that the basic Python machine learning models, the basic pandas, for example. So for example, we could load all that data into a data frame, and then we can run it through Juniper Notebook. And please, if I'm talking about technical things, I'm just trying to tell you that these are all open source products, and that me, in my humble abode, was able to set up the the things that were necessary. I'm like an engineer in here. I'm in here playing with stuff while I'm doing my other work outside of it. So I'm doing this on my own time as part of the consultancy side and the publishing side. But listen, folks, these tools are free. The challenge is, though, we don't want to leak data. Like, in order to use a really good language model that would just tell us the answer, which is kind of if the good is doing it by hand. We did spreadsheets, and we did join statements, and we did union statements, and we build pivot tables, and we drilled down, and we found an efficient way to do the work. That's way better than just grinding through 260 requirements. We got down to the 75, and then we got the stakeholders involved. I got to spend the majority of my time working with people. That's good, but better is using machine learning and Python scripts internally, and it doesn't have to be Python again, because you can do it in MicroStrategies, you can do it in whatever tools you've got. Just don't do it by hand. But the very best is the artificial intelligence model. But my concern is that you're going to leak data. Now, OpenAI is a government contractor, and they do have models that you can bring in on site. Now, this is not sponsored by OpenAI. I'm just reporting my experience in response to how can governance, risk, and compliance professionals use ChatGPT the right way. And part of using it the right way is a third-party risk analysis to know whether or not you're going to leak personally identifiable information, you're going to leak supervisory information, and as far as I can tell, you have a high potential to leak this information. Now, you can hash these records, and you can use something, but you use something to obscure the information, but you're going to lose the natural language. You want your controls written. An effective control is going to be written so that anybody in that business could pick it up and actually use it. They understand the control. The right parties are involved. All those linkages, you're going to get to it using the better model, which is the network diagrams and binary comparisons. But right now, the OpenAI stuff is not as secure as it needs to be. Now, could you train your own model? Sure, but they've already got a model trained. And so if you want to build towards that, then I got a number of ideas that were used, and I've tested them, and they weren't very supported with the leadership that I was working with at the time. So if you'd like to do something like this and you're not scared, we can show you ways to scan thousands of controls in a few hours. I did it by spreadsheet. They let me do it with a spreadsheet. They wouldn't let me do it with Python or let me do it with Perl or anything. Um, but a long story short is there are things you can do today, but to do it ethically. The other factor is to make sure that the businesses aren't using it weirdly. So if the businesses are using a data set that contains three or more factors that are independently not going to uniquely identify somebody, they could, when you feed it to a system that can go out and find other data. So for example, if you've used the AI model, but you've got scripts to go get other data, so maybe you're using a third-party database like Equifax, maybe you're using what used to be Info USA or something. You don't want to accidentally, if you're doing a marketing model to find new prospects, uh, leak who your current customers are. So you would write a customer avatar and build a configuration around a hypothetical individual, a model of an individual, rather than use actual data. Now, using actual data is way more effective because you can bump up your records of very best customers, 5 or 6 metrics about what makes a good customer. You could use a weighted model, and then you could go ask the data set for more customers. And I know you can do that in the advertising platforms. But again, we don't want to accidentally redline because the AI is doing something weird. Like the AI notices that certain ethnic groups or zip codes were better customers. Now they might be better customers in your data set because you haven't been able to market or reach other demographics. Maybe that's something you're still trying to do. Maybe your bank is only in certain zip codes, and so it reflects the zip codes which you have bank branches rather than the potential customer base everywhere. But because all those things can happen, and if you get sued, you can't we don't know exactly what the AI model's doing. So that's kind of the FTC model risk that I was talking about. If you're making decisions based on the machine learning binary model, you can explain how you train the model. But if you're using customer data sets and there's either a privacy leak or the data set turns out data that is biased, we don't really know how it did it because it's using other contextual information. So again, if you want to talk about this, I'll be happy to do a live session. I am not the expert on this area. My expertise is in the risk management side, the implementation of the business process around risk management, developing your RCSAs, your ARIAs, your test and validations. But ultimately, I do see a great potential for artificial intelligence to make this useful if we can be sure that the artificial intelligence is inside of our environment. Because the last thing I want to leave you with is if your paperwork or your inputs are poor going into the system, like it would be better to use the AI to scan your risk documents to see whether or not they make sense because there's a natural language model and it could say, yes, I can understand this, or it could give it a rating or a scale. And then you can scan all of your documents at one time and figure out which documents to focus effort. That's probably a better implementation than for it to help you find risk because the AI systems may find risk that doesn't exist because it's always going to give you an answer, not necessarily the right answer. But once when we talk about ethics of governance, risk, and control professionals, once the system identifies the risk, you now have an audit obligation to go look into it because it's been identified through your process. You identified a risk. Now you got to go through all the steps to make sure you validate it and check it. You just can't throw it away. So that may not be a good thing. So again, that's another example of where the machine learning and the language models can already help you by scanning documents and give you a scoring on the value or the quality of the document. And that has less risk internally than using a model that may be scanning your environment and telling you what potential risks exist in your environment. And so you don't want it to go through and say, oh, well, there's this obscure law from 1715 that made it into the constitutional whatever, and we're not covering it. And then when you ask it for its sources, it can't tell you the sources. It just says, oh, there's a privacy risk because of something. We need to have more control over what the thing is doing before we can have it tell us what's wrong in the activity and behavior of the business. But we can certainly use it to find data. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with is that the artificial intelligence models make great queries. They do a great job querying. They do a great job with classification. So if you query your documents, classify them according to a strict standard that you predefine, which you likely already have if you're reviewing these documents, you will get a more consistent and a faster model than having humans do it. Now, I know that's extremely disruptive because a lot of you guys are worried about your job. But again, I've been on teams where there's 4 of us and there really should have been 12 of us. The ones that are actually really doing work in risk management, I just saved you a lot of time. You can really start focusing on what matters. So if you have fewer people, you can focus them on more of what matters. You're going to get through the documents faster. Documents that kick out of a system that you're scoring, they're bad documents. That's how it works. You got 5 criteria to score the documents. It scores low on the quality score of that document. And now we're not looking, again, quality. We got language models here. We're not looking at quality as in, does it contain all the fields? We're looking at quality as does it make sense and can this process actually be implemented? So you're literally asking the AI to mentally perform the process and give us feedback on the complexity of the process, on its level of understanding. Maybe you're using readability scores. Maybe you're cross-referencing the nouns. So if you mention a role or a responsibility, is that also mapped in the RACI document? Or if you're mentioning a business unit, is the properly connecting in the architecture? So we talked about the network as well. Folks, this is exciting stuff. I have worked long nights and just blood coming down the eyes and it just, I'm on 275, this 275th control rewrite or review for a COSO thing. And I got people breathing down my neck about when is this going to be done? And I just know that if I go any faster, I'm going to miss something. And then we're going to be doing this crap all over again next month. So what tools, what systems, what environments are ready. Now, I do know people who can speak to this better if you'd like me to do an interview. I can go live and we can do Q&A session if you want. Or if you want more practical examples, because maybe you have a compliance management company and you're going to write some of these scripts. So PwC, KPMG, the big consulting guys, and you know who they are. I've worked with you in the past. If you want to start getting more intelligent about control validation, you want to get more efficient about the document, especially document retention, and then the document compliance elements. If there are 5 documents that every process needs to have, you don't send a human to go figure it out. Lock up, put them all in a library, get all the controls in your system of record, and scan that MF and make sure it's got what it needs. Now, and I'll admit to you guys, I'm not the most PC person about this, but I can get some work done, and I hope I've shared some practical ways to do so. Again, ask your questions below. I was going to do this as a live, but the live stuff didn't work well. If you want me to share my desktop next time, I think I got the technology for that. We could do a Zoom. It doesn't matter to me, but the key thing is AI is going to be disruptive in the environment. Already, machine learning, natural language, even just the basic stuff you could do. You should see the magic we were doing with SQL databases and stuff like that. When that stuff's ready to go, risk professionals, you better get your stuff together because we're not going to need as many of you. Now, maybe you'll get more work done if we have these tools, but regulators are not going to let you go, because if the regulators figure out that this stuff can be done, they're going to use it against you, and they're going to use the AI model to scan your documents, and the AI model is going to find all kinds of crazy stuff that you won't be able to justify, and you're going to be fighting MRA, MRIA, consent order, and all that stuff. Anyway, I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, and this has been about the exciting world of how governance, risk, and compliance professionals can use artificial intelligence, machine learning, and stuff that turns out is super easy if you're just willing and have the courage to implement it. If you have any questions about this program or anything I cover, visit me in the link below or at www inside strategicrelations.com. I need to remember to look at the camera, folks. And you can ask me questions. Go to the contact page or join our free newsletter. And I'm here to help you transform business relationships into profits guaranteed. And being able to get through a 7 or even a 3-year cycle of rewriting controls or auditing an environment in a matter of weeks, even complete at the end of a month, because you're focusing on the high impact stuff. And more importantly is when you get an audit, they don't find anything critical because you already took care of it, then you're in the right place. Ask me questions. I'd love to hear from you. Again, I'm Justin Hitt, and I'm uploading this to LinkedIn now. Thanks for watching.